Welcome to the Popcorn Talk Network, for the online broadcast network that features movie discussion, news, and interviews. Press 1.
Popcorn Talk. We talk movies.
From the Popcorn Talk Network, the online broadcast network for movie talk, this is Historic Hollywood, spotlighting the most influential and founding members of Hollywood.
Hello, all of the internet. Welcome back to Historic Hollywood, a celebration of the cinema of yesteryear and the people who made it. Real quick, follow the Popcorn Talk Network. You can check them out on YouTube, youtube.com/Popcorn Talk Network, or at Twitter, at The Popcorn Talk. I am Lex Michael, Twitter handle at The Lex Michael, and I'm here with
Byron Thompson, Twitter handle at Byron Lee.
Yes, so it's just the two of us this week. Karie Bible is off, and we are going to be picking up part 2 of our look at the life, the work, the legend of Marilyn Monroe. Now, when we left off, where were we? Byron, where were we when we left off?
Well, we had kind of left off on what we thought was a very influential film.
Yes.
Niagara.
Yes.
And it kind of changed her status because everything she had done up to that point, including two of the films that we talked about, Clash of Night and Asphalt Jungle, she's very much in a supporting role. And that's great for Marilyn Monroe because she's so beautiful and talented in that respect, but clearly Niagara was a jumping off point. Everything after Niagara suddenly kind of falls into the films I think we're going to talk about a little bit today, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything that we covered in part 1 was all prologue, if you will. That was the,
Truly.
In a sense, the secret origins of Marilyn Monroe. And it was right around the time of Niagara where we left off, where she really broke. This is really where we start to see the Marilyn Monroe, the icon, the version of Monroe that everybody knows now. In her personal life, she had just begun dating Joe DiMaggio. Things were looking decent, if I remember correctly. Byron, yes?
Very much so. I think that the biggest personality problem she started to have was the fact that she, as she had said to, I think, Eli Wallach, if memory serves, they had a promo for the 7-Year Itch where she has her dress coming up, and it was done in New York City. It's like 55 feet high.
Yes.
And she was with Eli Wallach and saw this gigantic thing that they had put out, and she said, that's how people see me, that's all they see. And Eli Wallach, thinking that, she's just like he, an actor and all that, thinking, well, a little bit confused because, like you said, she was clearly blowing up.
Sure. He
was like, well, that's great that people are knowing who you are, and her comment was clearly, that's all they see.
Right.
So I think that's the marriage, even though I think Joe DiMaggio was number 3. Does that sound right?
I believe it was 2.
Number 2, I think that marriage was the one that kind of dealt the lethal blow in terms of this problem that she started to have.
Yes, and we'll
get depression, all that stuff.
Yeah, and we'll get back to that specifically, as well as a little bit more on the 7-Year Itch in particular in a couple of minutes. But Niagara was 1952, if I'm not mistaken. Now, in 1953, she's still making movies with 20th Century Fox. In 1953, she appeared in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which was directed by Howard Hawks, who we've covered on this show before. I do want to pause on Gentlemen Prefer Blondes for 1 second, only because I know you and I have both professed to being fans to varying extents of David Lynch.
Oh,
and
of course.
I watched this movie shortly before we did our Hawks episode, and a couple of things struck me in particular as relate to David Lynch's work. It's very clear that he's a fan of films from this era. He's constantly referencing, Mulholland Drive is very much a tip of the hat to Sunset Boulevard, not in more than just title. But you've got a couple of things that you see recur in Lynch's work that appear in this movie, including the juxtaposition of a blonde and a brunette woman. But also something that just leapt right out at me when I watched it fairly recently was this little kid, the kid character in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, who shares a little bit of screen time with Marilyn Monroe, who's this little boy, and if you look at the way he's dressed and you look at his hair, he looks exactly like a tiny David Lynch. It almost looks to me like when David Lynch was a small boy, he saw Howard Hawks' Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and looked at this little kid and said, my goal now when I'm a grown man is to be the grown man version of this small boy in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes.
Yeah.
That's really all I have to say about that.
Well, because you brought up the David Lynch thing, I just wanted to say, because we were talking about Hawks, if you've ever seen, which I'm not so sure since it's not, I mean, it's readily available, Twin Peaks.
Twin Peaks is one of my favorite pieces of anything of all time.
Me too, but everything in there basically comes from The Big Sleep.
Yep.
Lydecker names. He pulls all the names. He pulls all the characters.
Gordon Cole is a reference to Sunset Boulevard specifically.
Right. His fascination, or I should say his deep interest in Hawks, knows no bounds. So it's not just that maybe he wanted to be that kid. He clearly uses all of those things from his work in his own work.
I think somewhere in our future there might be an episode that focuses solely on how much David Lynch loves all of these movies that we're talking about.
Because they're such a big part of his work as well.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So that's what I wanted. I just wanted to make that comment about Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. The very same year, also at 20th Century Fox, Monroe was in How to Marry a Millionaire, which also starred Betty Grable and Lauren Bacall. It was, if I'm not mistaken, the second film ever released in the CinemaScope widescreen format, which was making its emergence at the time.
Which is something that's going to be happening later this year with the Hateful Eight.
Yes.
It's a 65 millimeters, what it really is. The other 5 millimeters is just the soundtrack.
Ah. Interesting.
So yeah, absolutely, and that was a huge deal because, as we know from 7 Year Itch, which we're going to speak about, those cameras are so huge.
Yes,
takes, especially shooting in New York, it takes that much longer to get even the simplest thing done.
Sure, of course. Around this time was when she famously appeared on the cover of the very first issue of Playboy cover, and the centerfold.
Cover's not as critical, I don't think, is the
centerfold.
I know what you mean.
I should have led with centerfold.
I know what you mean.
The centerfold also featured at least one of the infamous nude photos that she had taken in 1949 that first started popping up during the production of Clash by Night.
Correct.
But this was a very big deal. I mean, Playboy is a publication that obviously still exists. It's pretty noteworthy. They actually recently just said we're going to stop featuring nude photos.
Right.
But
for whatever reason, that's going to be.
They really.
It's the future.
They're pushing the articles, man.
It's the future. Yeah, of course.
But she was the first model to appear as a centerfold in Playboy, which happened right around this time. And she was, at this point, one of 20th Century Fox's biggest stars.
True.
But her contract hadn't changed since 1950, which meant that even though she had blown up the way that she had, she was still being paid less than other stars of similar status. She couldn't choose her own projects. So she was getting pretty tired of being typecast. And there was a movie that came along called The Girl in Pink Tights that they wanted her to star in with Frank Sinatra. And it was another one of these, blonde, bimbo-ish sex symbol roles. And she decided she didn't want to do that, and she refused to do it. And so January 4th, 1954, the studio suspended her. It became a huge deal. Sure. I mean, and she began a campaign of self-promotion to try and spin this into her favor. She and Joe DiMaggio finally married on January 14th of that year, and then they went to Japan together. They were combining a business trip with their honeymoon, and she traveled alone from there to Korea. She performed songs from her movies for 60 to 70,000 American Marines over a 4-day period. And then in March, she finally reached a new settlement with Fox, which included a new contract, which they it's one of those, we'll work all the specifics out later, but new contract, and also a starring role in the film version of the hit Broadway play, The 7 Year Itch. So we do have some things regarding 7 Year Itch specifically that we wanted to talk about. So I wanted to kick it over to you.
Well, one of the most interesting things to me about the 7 Year Itch is they, like I was mentioning earlier, they shot almost entirely on location in New York City. That presented a lot of problems. Today, technically, sound is never an issue, but then I guess when they were recording in sync sound, so to speak, which is what it's referred to on set, they had a great amount of difficulty. So when they came back to Hollywood, they reshot a large portion of the film, including the famous subway dress raise, so to speak, which you mentioned to me earlier outside of the studio, that you never actually see the full body of Marilyn Monroe in the film, as all the posters and everything dictate.
And it's fascinating.
And that was a Haze Code thing, which we haven't talked about on this show very much, Haze Code, but they tried very, very diligently to prevent Fox from doing the 7 Year Itch.
Subject matter alone.
Absolutely, and they had because it deals with adultery. In the play version, I would like to share that the play version, he has relations with the Monroe character sexually, and that's a big part of the play. That's completely absent from the film.
Just to be clear, for those of us or who may be listening that don't necessarily know the play or the film, the 7-year itch, the term the 7-year itch, refers to you've been married for 7 years and you start getting a hankering to step out, as it were.
Hankering would be the right word.
Hankering, yes.
Because basically the idea is, that's basically the time that you realize maybe this whole marriage thing wasn't really what it was supposed to be. Or
sure.
Whatever.
So it stands to reason that the Haze Code might take a look at the subject matter and say,
They got so involved in the 7-year itch that while they were shooting in New York, they got involved with the Catholic League of Decency.
Really?
And a Monsignor came to the set. The writer, I think his name is George Axelrod of the play as well as the film,
yes,
came to Billy and said, well, what are we going to do? And Billy said, well, maybe we should just sit down with the Monsignor and just rewrite the whole thing so we don't have any issue. And of course, that was not going to work in a million years. But they made so many significant changes from the play that we don't, not only do we not have enough time to talk about it, but it's not something we can really go into. But more importantly, those changes that they made had little, if zero, effect on the film because of Monroe and because of Billy Wilder's just expert direction of such a very specific subject. It's no different than when Kubrick made Lolita. The tagline is, how did they ever make a movie of Lolita?
Sure.
Then you see the movie and it's like, well, clearly he understood the theme and the topic to where he can show it without, in a sense, being blatant.
And it's interesting to that point, like you said, it is interesting to me that quite possibly the most widely known, maybe the most iconic image of Marilyn Monroe
by far
is of her in the white dress with the subway creating the wind and blowing the dress
which is never once in the film.
The idea of it,
right? The idea is there, but not the poster.
Right, that scene is there,
sure.
But you never. It struck me when I watched it. It struck me that you never see all of her. You see maybe from the middle of her leg down.
And this is 54 when they're shooting this, correct?
They shot it 54, yeah, released in 55.
The only reason why I brought that up is because you and I were also talking about the amount of takes that she went through for this on the set as well as when they shot it in New York. This was already beginning to show a sign to clearly the studios as well as Billy Wilder and everything that I don't ever want to use with Marilyn the word difficult because I don't feel that was the case. I think that her idea of wanting to be like Gable and a lot of these people that she admired perfection, she never felt like 60 takes, that it's not a Kubrick thing, it's I want it to be right. And I totally respect that, but money is involved and I don't think that they were also super excited about that as well.
Exactly.
Not everybody shared that view at that time.
Sure. So the other thing that's worth mentioning about this shoot in relation to her personal life, and you and I were talking about this a little bit before we got on mic, and I wanted you to expound a bit upon it during the course of the show, but the sequence with the white dress and the
Correct.
subway, that sequence, the shooting of that sequence marked a big turning point in her marriage to Joe DiMaggio as well.
Well, there's they weren't called EPKs back then, but there was a press moment that Fox did with Marilyn, and one of the interviewers, or the interviewer basically asked, where's Joe? And she said, oh, well, he's in LA, he can't be here, that type of thing. He flew out, I think, within a few days from that press moment. And when he did, of course, the first night of shooting that he's there for is the infamous dress scene where I think the record is like 1,100 to 1,800 people were on the street lined up because they closed off the streets back in 1954 for this.
Sure.
And I guess the New York crowd heckled a little bit in a positive way towards Marilyn. Clearly, Joe didn't feel that was really positive.
And he was a notoriously jealous person.
Well, he also had a lot of puritanical values. He felt that a woman, this is a direct quote from I think his bio, that she should be at home and she should be having my children, and that was clearly not what was going to take place. Clearly that may have been an idea that was slightly overlooked, but still the idea was when he saw all these people screaming and heckling and getting involved, because clearly that's what she wanted, he flew back the next day and wanted no part of it, and clearly this was the end of their
Well, and she had, if that is what he wanted out of a marriage, she had in her first marriage lived through a version of that, and it was not anything. She wanted no part of it.
Wanted no part of it because that wasn't who she was ever.
Exactly. But this incident and the way DiMaggio internalized it, perceived it, and presumably was not able to let it go.
It should be noted, though, that they did attend the premiere together.
Yes.
Even though clearly they were already done, so to speak.
Well, they were maintaining a bit of a relationship even during the divorce proceedings.
Oh, absolutely.
That went on for a little bit of time, and they were together on and off, so on and so forth. In 1954, around the time 7 Year Itch was shooting, she was in a couple other movies that were released that year. Otto Preminger's River of No Return, 20th Century Fox, she appeared in with Robert Mitchum. Another Fox picture, There's No Business Like Show Business, which was their first musical in CinemaScope and Deluxe Color.
Correct.
But it did not fare particularly well. It was not well received by critics or by audiences. In fact, her performance, if I'm not mistaken, was singled out negatively.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not even a type of film where you would think to yourself, well, gosh, I can't wait to see that because Marilyn's in it, because it's such a small part of such a bigger idea of a film. It's like That's Entertainment films. These things are not typical narrative films, even though at the time that's clearly how they're presented.
Right. Now, these two came out after Niagara, before 7 Year Itch was released. So even though she was blowing up comparatively, her status as an icon, as a symbol, as that girl, was still arguably tenuous. But 7 Year Itch comes out and it's just like boof.
Which is even a more interesting to even think about, because the fear was all those changes because of the Haze Code, because of the Catholic League of Decency. Clearly we have got a flop. There's no way this is going to work, because even though, like, your remark is correct, she's blowing up, but it's kind of tenuous. She's not blowing up maybe the way that people would expect somebody who's got, no disrespect, talent.
Sure.
And when that movie came out, all bets were off.
Right.
It changed the course, not just of her career, but of the way Hollywood saw those type of things in movies. Because even though all those negative comments about adultery and sex and all that stuff, clearly Billy Wilder was able to show it in a way that was almost Disney-like. It's very accessible and not offensive to anybody.
Yes, it is. It is a story that is entirely about a man's desire to cheat on his wife, and it is presented in a very as innocent a way as is possible.
Well, the closing shots alone are almost like watching a TV show. It's so underscored from this whole idea of sex, even though, like you said, that's the only thing the movie's really about.
Yes.
But in the manner in which it's done, it's not going to really rub anybody the wrong way, I don't think, because of the way it's handled. It
is handled with such, and this is, I think, to the movie's credit, certainly to Billy Wilder's credit, but the subject matter is handled with such a light touch. I almost feel like it's one of the only movies specifically about sex that I feel like I could sit and watch with my grandmother, and it would be a totally pleasant experience.
It also marks one of the few times that one of my favorite directors, Billy Wilder, did not work with I.A.L. Diamond. Clearly, he's working with Axelrod, the play writer, and it seems to me, even though I'm sure you two are a big Billy Wilder fan,
sure,
it is doesn't really have his typical tone, because they are definitely adapting this play, which is fine. It's great, because I think he elevates the material, especially considering everything they really kind of took out.
Agreed. And it does have, to what you're saying, it has a certain stagey quality to it, which makes sense because obviously they're directly adapting a stage play. But especially when you look at the movies that Wilder was making around it, if I'm not mistaken, this came right after, for Wilder, this came right after Sabrina.
Correct.
I believe. And right before that, it was what, Stalag 17?
Correct.
So especially compared to his the two movies he had made just prior to this one, it feels very much a separate style of filmmaking from what we had seen from Wilder up until that point.
Since we're also covering the details of, obviously, the 7 Year Itch, it's important to note that there were two specific sequences cut from the film. Haze, obviously, not necessarily the Catholic League of Decency.
Sure.
You recall the sequence in which she's taking a bath with the plumber?
Yes, where she's got her big toe stuck in the faucet.
Correct. And that's a great scene, because she's clearly supposed to be naked in the bubbles and all that. It's a great sequence. But if you watch the film, as you can see it today, you notice it seems as though you're getting a pan to the right as we connect with the Tom Yule character, because clearly this is a fantasy of her telling everybody that she's seeing him. It's this idea of her going to be spreading it around to, clearly she's even telling the plumber, he attacked me on the piano, or whatever it is that she's saying. In the original sequence, which is available on the DVDs and things like that as an extra, the plumber drops his tool into the water and then says, "Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry," and has to reach into the water to take it out. They said, cannot have that whatsoever. And the famous scene that we've been talking about with the dress coming up, there was originally some dialogue where she asked Tom Mule, "Don't you wish you could wear a skirt?" And they said absolutely not, because of how good it supposedly feels.
Sure.
And these things to us seem ridiculous because they're cute, but then it was absolutely not.
Right. I mean, and all things considered, and considering how attentive Haze was to
At that time
to every detail of every production that he could be attentive to, it is still, I think, noteworthy that they were able to get away with as many of the jokes
course.
that they got away with.
And the adultery thing is still there, even though clearly that's not committed in a sense. It's there the whole time, and nobody's in this thing with blinders on at all.
Of course. So this movie comes out, and it is a huge, huge success.
The biggest success of the year for Fox.
Yes.
Number one film that they've ever made at that point in time in 1955.
Yes, and Marilyn is front and center.
Clearly.
Not just the movie, but she is, and not that she's featured prominently in the marketing. For all intents and purposes, she is the marketing.
Oh, absolutely. And we were talking outside that Billy Wilder said, she was a problem. We did all these takes. She didn't know her lines, but she's worth it.
Yeah,
yes. Not just because of the financial aspect, but when he saw the film, especially the color, he said, you could never figure out how to do that with anybody else. She's the thing, the real thing.
Yeah. So this movie, as we keep saying, was an unprecedented success for so many of the people involved. But despite the success of this movie, Marilyn was still having contract issues with Fox. And she took them to task for what she perceived as their failure to honor certain terms of her contract. And she decided, you know what? I'm out. She leaves Hollywood, she moves to the East Coast, and she starts her own production company called Marilyn Monroe Productions. Going forward, we'll just call it MMP. She takes the rest of 1955 and she dedicates it to studying her craft. And this is something that I think is very respectable about her, because she wasn't content to, once she really does explode. Like, if you haven't arrived before 7 Year Itch, that's it. That's, in a way, that's
as good as it's going to get.
Exactly.
Right, it's like, that's going to be it.
So, but not content to simply ride that wave, she takes the rest of 1955 in New York. She devotes it to studying her craft. She starts taking acting classes. She attends workshops on method acting at the Actors Studio, which was run at the time by Lee Strasburg. She becomes very, very close with Lee and his wife Paula. She takes private lessons at their home because she's very shy.
And she develops a very good and strong relationship with a student, Eli Wallach, of that. And basically,
you brought him up earlier.
And that's kind of a key to how. The real reason why I say this is because I think that she's very maligned as an actress.
Sure.
And I think that that's really unfair, because you said it best moments ago. She's trying not only to further herself, but further her craft. Clearly, even though she's being sold as a sex, that's it. That's all it's really being sold. But she sees much more to herself, even though clearly she's aware nobody else is seeing that.
Right.
And Eli Wallach was like, well, what are you talking about? Because he clearly saw her as a actor, like the way that she wanted to be seen. I think that's probably why their friendship really blossomed, so to speak. And
it's interesting too that they connected in those rooms on working the technique under Lee Strasberg's tutelage. And because she was apparently as shy as she was at times, she ended up taking private lessons with Lee at their home.
Correct.
And she developed a very close relationship with the Strasbergs, and they would become, they'd continue to be very close friends and influences for the rest of her career. She started undergoing psychoanalysis at Lee Strasberg's behest, because it was his opinion that to really achieve your utmost potential as an actor, you really have to be able to confront all of your emotional traumas so that you can take that and put it to use in your performances.
Which she had plenty.
She had
to pull from, so to speak. So that was, and since that was the best advice she could get.
Yeah, she certainly had a deep well of let's call it various unpleasantness. Yeah, let's say experiences. Let's call it experiences that she could pull from. And so I think that was decent advice on Strasberg's part. I imagine he was known to let a pearl slip out every now and again. So she did, while she was doing all of this, she wanted to remain in the public eye, because you can get as big as you can possibly get, but you're only relevant until you're not. So she wanted to remain in the public eye, so she would arrange publicity for herself throughout the year. And as I mentioned before, in her private life, she was still, despite the ongoing divorce proceedings, she was still carrying on a relationship with Joe DiMaggio even while this was going on. She was romantically linked to Marlon Brando for a little while. It was around this time that she was first linked romantically to Arthur Miller. who would continue to be a presence in her life
Absolutely.
going
For
forward.
sure.
The affair between the two of them actually would become increasingly serious until about October 1955, when her divorce from DiMaggio was finalized and he left his wife at that time. But concurrent to this, she was being urged by 20th Century Fox to cut the affair off because she was being looked at by the FBI for allegations of communism. She had been investigated around this time by the House
McCarthy hearings. Yeah, of course.
She was investigated by the House Un-American Activities Committee. The FBI opened a file on her, so they were concerned.
And they did that with so many people.
Yeah.
She was just falling into that because probably her profile was so high.
Right, and of course Fox is going, we have this massive commodity now that could potentially get blacklisted over this. Don't stop that. Stop carrying on with what you're doing. Do not do anything. Do not make a single false move that'll make anybody raise an eyebrow. Now is not the time. And this did, whether or not it should have, this did pose a potentially serious risk to her career at the time. But regardless of this, she just pressed on. She kept doing what she wanted to do, and she would later talk about it. She referred to the studio heads, I believe the quote is, born cowards. So
for sure.
She wasn't, which again, I think speaks to her, the caliber of her character, because she wasn't having it, you know? Even in the face of potential consequences, she said, I'm going to be me. I'm going to live my life. I'm going to do what I want to do. It's not hurting anybody. This is my business. This is not your business. Shoo.
Adversity never really seemed to be a problem for her. She seemed to always embrace it.
Yeah.
And unlike a lot of other people, and I'm not going to make any list of any women or actors, she always came out on top.
Yes.
Somehow, even the worst thing that happened to her, she was able to turn it into something that basically made her more interesting, more popular, and basically somebody who was seen as, I know it sounds odd at the time, but a very strong woman, all things considered.
Yeah, absolutely. So by the end of this year, they being Marilyn and 20th Century Fox, they finally came to an agreement over contracts. They agreed on a new 7-year contract, and it became clear to Marilyn that MMP was not going to be able to finance films by itself.
I was also under the impression that contract you're referring to, she was also able to pick not only the writer but the director in terms of getting final say. Am I mistaken about that?
Yes. So
that's what came out of the 7-year itch, correct? That popularity, right?
Yes. So the contract, this new 7-year contract, it required her to make 4 movies for 20th Century Fox within the next 7 years that the contract would cover. The studio would pay her $100,000 for each film, and it did grant her the rights to choose her own projects, her own directors, and her own cinematographers. And she would also be free to make 1 film with MMP per each completed film for Fox. So
sounds fair.
And look, not for nothing, we talked about how big a success 7-Year Itch is. They want Marilyn working again.
Clearly,
they know what they've got, and it's okay. You want that? Let's just keep you happy. Let's keep you happy so that we can make all of this money.
More movies.
Right. Yes. And around this time, June 29th, 1956, Marilyn Monroe and the playwright Arthur Miller were married. They were married in the Westchester County Court in White Plains, New York. And 2 days later, they had a second Jewish ceremony at his agent's house near Katona, New York. And when they got married, Marilyn converted to Judaism. And I did a double take when I was doing my research and I read this, but her conversion to Judaism apparently led Egypt to ban all of her movies. Which...
To this day?
Certainly at the time.
So maybe not today.
Maybe not. Somebody on the internet, do me a favor, you check into that for me. But my head spun a little bit when I read that. I didn't quite know where to put that in my brain, but there it is. So now it's making movies with 20th Century Fox again. Fox is clearly very, very, very happy to have their commodity back to work. First one they made together under this new contract is Bus Stop in 1956.
The ban was lifted in 1961.
Thank you, Stephen. As of 1961, then, our lovely engineer, Stephen, in the booth, just fact-checked that for us. As of 1961, Egypt allowed Marilyn's movies to be shown again, so I'm glad they got over that.
We should go to Egypt.
I'm really glad they got over that. So, I know that you have some thoughts about Bus Stop, or you certainly have some things that you can say about it.
It's Don Murray, correct?
I believe so.
I have a few things to say just because it was similar to the 7-Year Itch. I think they were trying to recapture that lightning in a bottle thing by adapting a play.
Yes.
I don't really feel as though, being a big Fox person, I don't feel that Fox was looking at the commodity as having any real true talent except for the sex part, so to speak. So Bus Stop seemed like a perfect fit, just like the 7-Year Itch. And look at how many problems they had with the 7-Year Itch, and then, like you said, and we've already spoken, it really exploded. So Bus Stop was appealing to her in a lot of ways because of this whole thing you talked about, Strasburg. Her acting chops were going to finally be really on display in this film, and they did not want to bring in, much like the Tom Yule character who made it famous on Broadway, they certainly didn't want somebody to take away from her. And I'm almost positive that that's the first film Don Murray's ever made, even though he clearly was on Broadway and did it as well. I think the whole idea, like you had made the comment about how they want to keep her happy.
Sure.
I think that Bus Stop is, out of all of her films, almost a vanity piece, because I think the whole thing was designed to serve her interest in becoming this actress, and also the fact that nothing was taken more serious than the boards, Broadway and such at that time. And here she was going to be shortly an actress that took 2 plays on Broadway and made them, basically iconic forever.
Sure.
And Bus Stop is not anything like the 7-Year Itch. Quite the opposite. A very subdued, for lack of a better word. It's not at all a rip-roaring story. If anything, it's almost like some of the films that are done independently today. It's not at all something where basically you have something to really push. It's not that type of story at all.
Sure. But it is interesting and a bit ironic that it was given to her, maybe, as you say, to appease the actress,
right?
And they didn't really consider her an actress of much merit. She was in their minds the symbol that she was, and I find that ironic because this movie really clicked with people when it came out.
Oh, absolutely!
It was a hit at the box office. Critics loved it. Critics commented that she had finally proven herself to be the actress that she kept saying that she was. She received a Best Actress Golden Globe nomination for her performance. So
more validation.
Exactly.
Completely. It just kept going.
An incredibly validating moment. So you have that, and immediately following up as big a hit as 7-Year Itch. So cementing a lot of these things in place going forward. 1957, she did a movie called The Prince and the Showgirl.
Which, of course, we know that there's the film with, I think is it Michelle Williams that plays her in My Week with Marilyn?
Yes.
And that's fairly accurate. Unlike a lot of the people here, like Eli Wallach and people that went to Strasburg, Laurence Olivier did not necessarily share that view with people here in America that she was an actress. And
Laurence Olivier, who directed the film and was also her co-star.
And, of course, she couldn't have been more excited about this prospect, but then... Of course, she has her own ideas about what has to happen as well.
Of course, and there are a number of stories surrounding the production of that movie pertaining specifically to her personal life, as many of these stories surrounding production of her movies end up doing. They, again, refer to her behavior as you so often hear her behavior on set referred to as being difficult, which is nebulous and oftentimes unfair, but... That's another word that got thrown around a lot. Her drug use allegedly began to increase around this time, and she was said to have become pregnant and miscarried during the production of this movie.
That's absolutely correct. She did have that miscarriage, and it's strange, but I think that to some degree, because of her status, as we were talking about last time we were talking about Marilyn, the iconic status seems to almost kind of push away a lot of those kind of finite details. I mean, she was still a person.
Absolutely.
Still involved in relationships, got pregnant, didn't get pregnant, had a miscarriage, had these troubles, and people tend to kind of gloss over that because of who...
Well, so often we expect our heroes, our icons, to be so much more than it's reasonable to expect that they can be. They are, at the end of the day, still absolutely fallibly human. And she was certainly no exception.
Perhaps her the most of all.
Absolutely.
For those reasons, as she blows up, that even gets worse.
Yeah, so all of this stuff was going on. Now, despite all of this happening, the movie was finished on schedule, was released on schedule, but upon its release, it didn't catch on the way her last 2 movies had. The reviews were very mixed, especially among American audiences. It didn't gain the popularity that I think they were hoping for, especially when, if I'm not mistaken, this was the first movie that she had at least co-financed through MMP, her own independent entity.
Right, and I think therein lies the problem. You have 2 different people making this movie. You have Marilyn Monroe trying as hard as she might to make a Marilyn Monroe movie, and you've got Laurence Olivier trying to make a film
Right.
that has this dramatic, impact. And those two things do not line up at all, which I think, unfortunately, doesn't serve the film.
Right. And the returns on the movie more or less reflected that.
Yeah, if you're Lawrence, you're into it. If you're a Marilyn fan, you're into it, but it just doesn't mix. It doesn't match.
Right. So following the release of that motion picture, Marilyn decided, I'm going to take a hiatus. I'm going to take 18 months, and I'm going to focus on me outside of the industry. I'm going to focus on my marriage to Arthur Miller. And she took this time for herself. And this break is significant if only because of what she returned to, So takes this 18 months, and she comes back with, I would say, one of the most highly regarded motion pictures of certainly of her career, of the year it came out, and of the career of its director, Billy Wilder. I'm referring, of course, to 1959's Some Like It Hot, which Billy Wilder directed, and she starred in along with Jack Lemmon, Tony Curtis, George Raft, Pat O'Brien.
Everybody likes to make lists, and I know that there's a lot of shows even about lists, but most people consider this the number one, if you can give it a number, greatest comedy ever made.
It does tend to make a lot of those lists.
I'm quick to agree, even though I tend to like other types of comedy. I think that there's something very accessible about Some Like It Hot that tends to transcend. It's a black and white film. It's perfect. It has comedy that can reach anybody, and it's not a Marilyn Monroe film. She's a part of it, which I think serves her better.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, really quickly, in case anyone listening is not familiar with Some Like It Hot, Byron, what is the general plot of Some Like It Hot?
Two men that owe money are trying to figure out a way to get out of town.
And that's Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis.
Correct. And they have this great idea about how, we could just do this, we could just do that. They're scheming. And unfortunately, they bear witness to the famous St. Valentine's Day massacre, which I think that's the George Raft role, so to speak, of the gangster.
Yes.
And when they do, everything's fine, except they can't slip away. So unfortunately, they are found out, and they're basically going to be marked men, and they come up with this great idea. We should get involved with this girl's musical train that's getting ready to leave. We'll just be women. Who's ever going to look for us there? And of course, that's where they end up meeting the Marilyn Monroe character, who's a part of I think she's a ukulele player. Is that right?
If memory serves,
that sounds right, doesn't it?
That sounds accurate.
And she sings in the movie, and she's great. She's an absolute, I hate to use this word, but she's a delight in every way.
She is. She's tremendous in it. And the role that she plays, this character named Sugar Cane, on the page, it was, in her perception, another quote-unquote dumb blonde role. And she was, at first, hesitant to take it. But a combination of elements eventually persuaded her. Partially, it was her husband, Arthur Miller, was encouraging her to take this part. But also, she was offered 10% of profits in addition to her standard pay. And money talks as loud as just about anything else.
Probably louder, I think.
I would think. Now, again, not to unfairly throw the word around, but the word difficult certainly came up during the production of Some Like It Hot as applies to Marilyn Monroe, to the extent that this is a legendarily troubled production, which is all the more interesting considering how well the final product ultimately turned out.
Well, it's the same thing as 7 Year Itch. If you watch any documentaries or even read any backstory on 7 Year Itch, it sounds like a film that's never even going to be completed.
Sure.
Because of those obstacles. You could say exactly the same thing about Some Like It Hot, with one huge exception. Wilder was not necessarily off Marilyn after 7 Year Itch. Clearly, after Some Like It Hot, he was pretty much done. That's how difficult things got.
Sure. There are certain stories that we have from the production of Some Like It Hot, including things like, Marilyn wouldn't, she doesn't know her lines. She would demand innumerable retakes. She wouldn't take direction. Tony Curtis famously stated that kissing her was like, and I quote, kissing Hitler.
Which I think about that all the time.
About kissing Hitler?
Doesn't everybody?
It
seems like when he made that comment, clearly he was definitely trying to say something.
Yeah, I would think so. And it seemed like a lot of these conflicts...
But you mentioned Tony Curtis, and Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis at this time were considered the consummate professionals. And here's Wilder, and then here's this girl who really is trying to be a great actress, and it, for whatever reason, just didn't work out so great.
And especially when, like you say, Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis were known for being these consummate
Total
professionals. What do you got to be doing to get Tony Curtis to compare you to Hitler?
I can tell you two
Publicly.
things. I can tell you two things that I know of.
Yeah.
You can be inside your own bubble, which the production, basically, you made the comment about her sometimes not knowing her lines, being difficult, but you got to show up. And she didn't a lot of the time. And Wilder just, clearly shot around her. You watching the movie, like you said, you'd never know there was any difficulty whatsoever, and including even the scenes together. Monroe and Curtis are great, but I guess she was just like basically at this point in time, seeing who she had become.
Sure.
She was pretty much just going to do it her way. I think in some ways we're lucky that we even have the film that we have as it is.
Agreed. I really enjoyed this quote that I found from Billy Wilder. In the end, he was happy with her performance.
Absolutely. I wasn't saying that at all.
Sure.
He loves what he clearly did. That's for sure.
In his words, and I love this, I'm quoting, "Anyone can remember lines, but it takes a real artist to come on the set and not know her lines and yet give the performance she did."
That's a great thing.
I think I really, really enjoyed that. Now, more difficulties in her private life during the production of Some Like It Hot. She became pregnant again and miscarried again soon after the motion picture wrapped in November. Now, despite all of the difficulties that faced the production, it did wrap on time. The movie was released in March of 1959, became one of the most successful films of the 1950s, and earned her a Best Actress Golden Globe. Not just the nomination, but the statue itself.
Pure validation.
What else do you need after that? How many more pats on the back?
You might have some knowledge about this being an actor, but I think that there can probably never be enough.
Yeah. So right after that, she took another hiatus until late 1959. She returned to make Let's Make Love in 1960 for director George Cukor with Yves Montand and Tony Randall.
And it's important to note that there was a relationship there as well.
Yes.
I'm assuming you were about to get to.
Yes, she did have an affair with Yves Montand, which was widely reported by the press and was actually used by the studio in the film's publicity campaign. Unfortunately, however, when Let's Make Love was released in September 1960, it flopped.
She openly criticized, though, I think it should be noted, the director to, I'm not sure about the pronunciation, is it Yves?
Yves Montand.
She openly criticized the director to him specifically, and I think that really confused him, coming from a very different way of making films overseas. Like, well, wait a minute. I thought, are we all on the same team type thing? And I think she took solace in him because she, like you said, was clearly having her own issues, her own difficulties at that time.
Absolutely. Now, shortly after this, Truman Capote himself lobbied for Marilyn to play the role of Holly Golightly in Paramount's film adaptation of his novel Breakfast at Tiffany's, but the role, as we all know, eventually went to Audrey Hepburn, apparently because Paramount was concerned over all of these allegations of her difficult behavior. They were afraid that hiring her for this role would complicate the production.
Absolutely.
So she didn't get that part. But 1961 brought a movie called The Misfits, which was directed by John Huston. Now, this movie was written by her husband, Arthur Miller, allegedly to provide his wife with a meaty role in a drama. Although at this point, for various reasons, the marriage between Monroe and Miller was effectively over. Now, her health at this time was also beginning to fail. She was in pain from gallstones. Her drug addiction was severe by this point, to the extent that her makeup usually had to be applied while she was still asleep under the influence of barbiturates.
Can you be a little bit more specific about the drug addiction, so to speak? Was it painkillers?
Painkillers,
because of these problems that she was having physically.
Yes.
So basically, she's no different than anybody today. She just became addicted to these things to keep her going.
As can unfortunately often happen. In August, filming on The Misfits was halted for a week so that she could spend that week detoxing in an LA hospital. After filming wrapped, Monroe and Miller officially separated, and she was granted a quick divorce in Mexico in January 1961. And when The Misfits was released the following month, it was not a success. The reviews were very mixed. It did not succeed at the box office. And it would, unfortunately, come to be Marilyn's final completed film.
And the final film for the other two stars as well, the Montgomery Clift and Clark Gable. And it's also of note that the whole reason why she said she got into Hollywood in the first place was Clark Gable.
Yes.
Kind of fitting that final film is with the whole reason why she began in the first place.
And it was the final film for both of them. Now,
It's a tragic film in a lot of ways.
In a metatextual sense, it very much is.
Oh, very much so. And the story is very tragic. It's just one of those type of movies that's not necessarily the one that you want to put on your Christmas list, per se.
So instead of taking on new projects after this production wrapped, she spent a large part of 1961 preoccupied by her health problems. She underwent surgery for her endometriosis, and she spent weeks in a hospital to overcome depression. She was helped at this time by Joe DiMaggio, her ex-husband, and they still did have they hadn't been in touch, but there was still love there. And in her time of need, he was there to help support her, even though they hadn't really been in touch since their divorce was finalized years and years earlier. She moved back in spring 1961 to LA from New York. She began a relationship with Frank Sinatra. Now, she started production in 1962 on a motion picture called Something's Gotta Give, which was directed by George Cukor. Now, she was absent for the first 2 weeks of filming. There are a number of theories why. Maybe it was the flu. Maybe it had to do with her drug addiction. May 19th of this year, she took a break from filming to famously sing Happy Birthday to President John F. Kennedy at his birthday celebration at Madison Square Garden. And most biographers agree, as most people are at least somewhat aware, that she had an affair with the president, allegedly, at some point
and his brother.
And allegedly his brother as well, during the
Can't leave that out.
during the last 2 years of her life.
Right.
The further absences from the set of Something's Gotta Give ultimately resulted in her being fired off of the film and sued for breach of contract, which brings us
To Dean Martin?
well, if you want to really, we're running short on time, but yes,
sure, go ahead.
No, but real quick, if you can make the Dean Martin point.
Well, he basically said that he wasn't going to do the film unless she was reinstated.
Right.
That's all there was to it, because clearly she was fired, but she was reinstated, and she didn't live to enjoy that aspect of it.
Right.
That's all I was really going to say.
So now, so now we arrive at the early morning of August 5th, 1962. Early morning, Maryland's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, was called to her home in Brentwood by her housekeeper. The housekeeper had woken up at about 3 a.m. and just got a feeling that something was not...
Didn't feel right.
Something was not right. Something was very off. And she saw a light from under Marilyn's bedroom door, but she couldn't get a response. The door was locked. She couldn't get in. So she called Greenson, who was able to gain entry to the room, and they found Marilyn there. And she was gone. She had passed away at some point in the night.
I don't want to be a conspiracy person.
There are theories.
But I don't think that it's appropriate not to say that at this point in time, when she was first discovered, that she was not dead.
Go on.
Hence our little book that we brought here, The Last Days of Marilyn, the keeper and whatnot. There was I'm not trying to say anything that's even remotely not validated by text and history and things like that. When she was first discovered from her overdose, which clearly is what killed her.
Yes.
I'm not saying anything else did. I'm not saying something strange happened. They did not alert or bring in an ambulance. They tried to basically, because there were certain people, Kennedy and whatnot, that were involved in this tryst, so to speak, at this point in time. That time would have never saved her. I'm not even pretending that something would have been any different.
Sure.
It's just that I think the story is written in a kind of a superficial way of like,
yes,
she died and that was all there was to it. But there was a little more going on because clearly of not only her status, but these relationships of, in a sense, of high profile nature.
And the answers to these questions, if they are the answers that...
If there's such a thing.
Right.
Right.
These are answers we don't have. And
Clearly.
if it is that... there are plenty of people who are going to make sure that we don't get those answers.
And there's also plenty of information to contradict what we're saying,
Sure.
and even more to cover more.
Well, the information that we do have, the toxicological analysis concluded that her cause of death was acute barbiturate poisoning. Her body contained chloral hydrate and pentobarbital in amounts well over the lethal limit. And combined with a lack of solid evidence
True.
that it was foul play, her death was ruled a probable suicide. And that was it for her. The French artist Jean Cocteau commented that her death should serve as a terrible lesson to all those whose chief occupation consists of spying on and tormenting film stars. Laurence Olivier, her former director and co-star, deemed her the complete victim of ballyhoo and sensation. The director, Joshua Logan, who made Bus Stop, stated that she was one of the most unappreciated people in the world. They held a funeral for her on August 8th at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery. It was arranged by Joe DiMaggio and her business manager, Inez Melson, who invited only around 30 of just closest friends and family. Police were also present to keep the press away and to control the several hundreds of spectators who crowded the streets around the cemetery. She was interred at crypt number 24 at the Corridor of Memories.
Well, it's important to note that not only did Joe DiMaggio pay for the funeral, but he specifically controlled the guest list.
Yeah.
And he wanted no one there except those people that were clearly friends or family of Marilyn, which is very few. So that's in the sense that you said like 30 people, that's all there was.
So that's Marilyn's story, and there's a very palpable element of tragedy to especially the last few years of her life, I feel. And there were certain people around her that recognized what she was going through, how difficult it was for her to reconcile who she saw herself as, who she wanted to be, with what the rest of the world wanted from her. And I think it was probably pretty clear to the people around her near the end of her life that she needed help.
Oh, absolutely.
But that help was not forthcoming, and we see what happened. And it's a shame.
And we see it today. You know, Heath Ledger. It's like these things happen, and yet nobody seems to be paying attention, and they happen all the time.
And now
she's just kind of like a tipping point.
And we have this eternal image of Marilyn Monroe, and for most people it is the image of Monroe from the 7-Year Itch. We have this image, and that's what she left us with. She left us with something that, again, is matched by so few, in that how often does somebody become an icon of that stature, of that level? So
I'm speechless when I think of it, because when we first did this show, I told you my first introduction to her was through an entirely different film where she's mentioned. I didn't even really know who she was, and I feel like a lot of people say how popular people are and things are, I can't imagine anything more popular or more identifiable than Marilyn Monroe worldwide.
And it is because of that so easy to forget what a human being, what a vulnerable, emotional, real person she was. So hopefully by telling her life story in 2 parts, by talking about her personal life as well as her work, hopefully,
and showcasing her films,
absolutely,
which she has made some wonderful films.
Yeah, so
amazing films.
Hopefully if you didn't know some of the things that we've talked about, hopefully we've enlightened you a little bit as to who the real person was, and hopefully you'll be encouraged to go check out some of these movies. I know you can find a lot of them on Netflix. I know Bus Stop is streaming right now. I think some of the movies she did with Billy Wilder,
How to Marry a Millionaire,
they're all over the place. I cannot recommend some of them highly enough. Please go check them out. And that's going to do it for us on this episode of Historic Hollywood. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
You can, as I mentioned at the top of the show, you can follow the network, youtube.com/Popcorn Talk. Follow them on Twitter @The Popcorn Talk. I am Lex Michael. I'm all over the internet on all of the Insty things at the Lex Michael.
I'm on Twitter @Byron Lee.
All right. Thank you guys very, very much for joining us. This has been Historic Hollywood. We will see you next time.
That you care, won't you write and declare that though on the loose you are
From producers
still
Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, Christian Harloff, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of its owners and principals.